this person join? Okay, I think we should get started. You guys good to start? AP crew? All right. Welcome everybody. My name is Sarah, and I will just go through a few technical housekeeping details of this call before passing over to Finn from AP and to Dave. So firstly, thank you so much for being here. This is our first APTV launch, I guess, our first report, and we're really thrilled to see so many people. Also some fantastic backgrounds, I have to say. Look at these, they're great. But yeah, so lovely to have you all here. And I will just remind you, as you've clicked, you've already agreed to this, but this meeting is being recorded. So if you have any issue with that at any point, just let me know, or let anyone of the AP team know in the chat, or you can reach out to us at a later date if you have any problem with that in the future. And you can reach out to us at media@atlanticpacific.org.uk. But just so you know, the meeting is recorded and will probably be publicly shared at some point. So a few little pieces of housekeeping. We'll be making a speakers list after the presentation. So if you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please write in the chat. Please indicate that you would like to ask a question or leave a comment. And it would be ideal if you could actually write that comment out in the chat. If you just like to ask it yourself, please indicate that you would like to speak yourself. And if you'd like me or somebody to read it out for you, we're happy to do that as well. And just the formality behind that is to keep things a bit organized, since it's not helpful if everyone unmutes at the same time. So on that note, if you're not asking a question or making a comment, please keep yourself muted throughout the presentation, unless you're being called upon to speak from the speakers list. And of course, again, use the chat however you wish throughout the talk. Leave any kind of comments, mention things that are of interest from what you're hearing, and of course the question periods will just indicate in there again. And most importantly, if you have any technical issues or any connection problems, anything like that, you can send me a message either privately or just to the whole group, and someone will try our best to help you. So I will pass over to Robin Jenkins from AP. Take it away, Rob.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on our inaugural Hello, I think I was muted there. Hi, welcome. A few technical problems on our first inaugural APTV presentation. This is something that we've just started doing, and we're really excited about what this will do for Atlantic Pacific, and hopefully you'll join us in the future for other APTV presentations and productions. But today we're really, really excited and really pleased to be joined by Dave Whiddon. We've known Dave for a while through our connections with the RNLI. Dave has been a great support and advisor to Atlantic Pacific. So for those of you who don't know about Atlantic Pacific, we're a small charity that's growing rapidly. We've been established for sort of around 4 years, give or take. We've been a standalone charity for just over a year, in fact, but we've been operational for a lot longer. And our first project was in Japan, in the tsunami-affected region of the Northeast, where we provided a mobile lifeboat station, which we coined the lifeboat in a box, which is a 40-foot shipping container that has a 4.5-meter rigid hull inflatable boat built by students at Atlantic College. And it has a workshop and a changing facility in there. And this was a response to discovering that Japan has no national lifeboat service. And that's a project in itself, which one day we'll present here on this channel. So I won't go into detail about it now. But the result of that project meant that we established this charity for specifically that purpose, for providing lifeboats where there are none, but also to train crew to go and work in situations where drowning is a problem. So It started with a summer school in Atlantic College nearly 5 years ago this summer. We were originally training crew to go to Japan with us, and we ended up putting an advert on Facebook, and we got inundated with requests to come and join us. This year we were due to run another one, but due to the coronavirus situation, we're unable to. But as a result of our summer schools, we've now trained over 200 crew, many of whom have gone on to work in the refugee crisis in the Aegean and the Mediterranean. And we are now opening a new training facility in London, which we hope to have up and running in October, all COVID dependent. But so there's exciting things going on. And we decided that a lot of our training and a lot of our activities could be spread over the internet, and that's why we set up APTV, was to do this. So that's Atlantic Pacific, and as I said, Dave has been a really great friend, advising us on things, and he joined us last year on our summer school and did some presentations to the participants there. Dave has worked with the RNLI for 17 years. He first worked there as an instructor and lifeboat trainer, and he was a volunteer with flood rescue, the RNLI flood rescue team. During his time there, he now has gone on to start working with the RNLI's international department, which is based in their headquarters down in Poole in Dorset, South England. And has been heavily involved with projects in Bangladesh and Tanzania. And most recently, he's been working on the international manual for rescue and life-saving, which has been a project that was joint with the International Maritime Rescue Federation. It was initially a manual that was branded with RNLI branding, and now has become the standard manual for the IMRF. So it's really exciting for us to have Dave with us today, who's going to give a presentation about his work, and I hope you all enjoy it. We'll be here at the end to tell you a little bit more about the projects that we're doing, ways of getting involved and getting in contact with us. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to Dave. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you at the end.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for the introduction. And first of all, I'd just like to say a big thank you for allowing me to come and share some of my experiences, my learning, and great to see that there's so many people online from all over different parts of the world. I am new to presenting on Zoom, so please bear with me. I am going to now share my screen and make sure this presentation is working. But the presentation is going to give you a little bit of background to the RNLI, and then that will lead on to a little bit about our international work. So if you are familiar with the RNLI, please bear with me for a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to give you a bit of a context of who the RNLI is before I start talking about the RNLI's international work. I know, as I said, some of you will be really familiar with the work of the RNLI, but if you're not so familiar, if you're in other parts of the world, it just gives you a bit of a context of what the RNLI is, who they are, and how we go about the work that we do. So the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, is a charity and non-government organisation. It was founded in 1824, so we're coming up to almost 200 years. So in 2024, we're due to have our 200-year anniversary. So we've been in the business of life-saving for a long, long time, with lots of experience, and an organisation that has evolved as we've moved through time. And if you look at that picture there, when you think how people used to go out to rescue in rowing boats, it's quite fascinating to see, you know, and it's quite an exciting time to see how the RNLI is moving forward. But in terms of what the RNLI really is around providing a search and rescue service, and they do that through the lifeboats. They also have a lifeguard, which is seasonal, and then we also have a flood rescue team, which can provide flood rescue in the UK and we have deployed overseas on a number of occasions as well, especially in Mozambique and then in Guinea Equatorial. And we've also sent a couple of subject matter experts to big floods in the Philippines. And as I say, flooding is on the rise, so let's see what the future of flood brings. But also what is very important for us is our community safety. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the drowning chain in a minute, but the community safety aspect of our work is really, really important. So how do we provide the service? So the RNLI is mainly pure volunteers. And if you look at the number there, 95% of RNLI people are volunteers. And we have also a lot of community fundraisers. And as I say, we are a charity, so we purely rely on money that is donated to us, whether it's through fundraising events, legacies, community fundraisers like you see in the picture there that go out and support the RNLI by doing collections. So we're well aware of the importance of our volunteers that allow us to be able to go out and do what we do. As well, we have volunteers that work in other areas. So we've got museums where we've got a lot of the RNLI heritage, offices, shops, and visitor centres, and we get people from all walks of life that come and support the vital work that the RNLI does. But if you look at why the RNLI is so important, well, we are an island. We have a very, very extensive coastal, and we have a number of incidents that happen on a regular basis. And you look at the statistics there for 2018, 41,619 people were rescued and assisted by the RNLI. And that actually equates to 329 lives saved by the RNLI crews and lifeguards around the coast of Ireland and the UK. And what we constitute as a life saved is that had the RNLI not directly given assistance and provided the service they did, then that person would have not made it. So that is a big number of people that have owe their lives to the RNLI, and that's in the UK and Ireland alone. And why do people drown? Well, that's the question that we ask ourselves, and we try and find out more. So traditionally, the RNLI just very much focused on rescuing. So we're all about rescue, rescue, rescue. However, what we wanted to do is really try and understand is why do people drown? This is what this drowning chain is actually trying to portray. So in some places, preventing drowning is not a priority. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute when we go on to talk about our international work. But people are not aware of the issue, or they don't see it as an issue. It's not a priority. And that can be at a very, very high level, whether it's a government or whether it's local people in the community. They might know that people drown, but they don't see it as an issue. Sometimes it's accepted that people will drown. Next, if you look at the next side of the chain is that places are not safe. You know, people are isolated, so they haven't got basic safety equipment, or they haven't got safe working environments where they can be kept safe from drowning. Also, people's behaviour. If you've been in the UK recently, over the last couple of weeks, there has been quite interesting behaviour of since we've lifted the lockdown. People have been flocking to the beaches, and the behaviour has been quite shocking in some respects, where people have put themselves in unnecessary danger. And a lot of it can be based around people not being aware of the dangers, or just that they do not think it's appropriate to behave safely and jumping off 300-foot cliffs into the sea. A lot of people don't realise that actually it can do a lot of damage. And then ultimately, if people do get into trouble, they cannot save themselves. And that's where the RNLI is important in terms of providing that rescue service. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and interrupt that drowning chain at all the different levels, because ideally, in an ideal world, we would do ourselves out of the job and we would never have to go and rescue people. So if everybody behaved safely, everybody had the right equipment and knew how to behave, then ultimately they wouldn't lead into dangerous situations that they put themselves in, and we wouldn't have to go out and save them. But I don't think we'll ever get to that. That's going to be an ideal situation, but I think there's always going to be a need to rescue, because no matter what systems you put in place, there's always a small probability that people are going to end up needing to be rescued. If you look at the RNLI's footprint across the UK and Ireland, we've got 238 lifeboat stations, and we have a number of different boats that provide the service. Obviously, the boats come with their limitations and capabilities, and the RNLI has basically risk assessed the whole coastline, and every 5 years they do what's called a coast review to make sure that the service that we're providing is actually fit for purpose. And as you can imagine, to provide this service, it's a high expense, so we want to make sure that we're making the most use of the money that the RNLI is getting funded for. So we are accountable to our donors to make sure that we are using that money effectively. So as I said, every 5 years there's a constant review to make sure that we have the right cover along the UK, and sometimes that cover changes. You know, if you look at traditionally what the RNLI used to go out to rescue was generally fishing industry or merchant industry. However, nowadays a lot of it is recreational. A lot of recreational users, and also it depends where you are around the UK and Ireland, and also seasonal as well. Sometimes in the winter it's very, very quiet, but then come April, May, when the weather starts to get us, that gets really, really busy. And for that we have, as I say, a fleet of all-weather lifeboats, which are designed to do exactly what it says, to go out in every weather conditions. And then we also have an inshore lifeboat fleet, which again is more designed for inshore waters close to land, where they can get in and out of nooks and crannies. And this is the workhorse of our fleet. The D-class lifeboat is what provides the most rescues along our coastline, because it's quite a fast craft that can get into small areas of the coast, especially if people are cut off by the tide or stuck on cliffs. It's a very versatile vessel, and as I say, it's pretty much the workhorse of our fleet. And then we've got the RNLI West rescue craft of jet skis, as used by lifeguards, and we have now realised that in some stations where there is a lot of surf, they're invaluable in carrying out those surf rescues as well. So it's a really versatile craft. And what's nice about the jet ski as well is that you don't need many people to operate it, whereas in an all-weather lifeboat, minimum requirements to go out on a rescue is 5, whereas on a jet ski you can go out with 2 and carry out an effective service. So we are looking at how we can use these more effectively across our search and rescue areas. And then we've got the flood rescue team, which is currently under review. However, we've got a number of teams that are declared to the UK DEFRA. So at any point, if there is any major floods in the UK, we can be requested to go and work alongside other agencies that might be responding, like the fire service, police, ambulance, and help out wherever we can. And lifeguards, again, lifeguard service is fairly new within the history of the RNLI. Sort of 2001, they set up in a number of beaches, and at the last count, I think we're at around 250 beaches. So to see over the last sort of 19 years how the lifeguards have evolved, it's phenomenal to see. And again, it's a really growing service across the UK and Ireland, and we've now helped a number of organisations with their lifeguard services as well. And then talking about our international work, this is where I'm quite privileged to be involved in. So as Robin said in his introduction, my background was training all our volunteers in different aspects of lifeboating. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to work in the international team. So why are we doing the international work? So historically, the RNLI has been involved internationally in a number of ways. We've sold a lot of our old lifeboats to different organisations. If you travel around the world, you might find lifeboats still in service out in South America and Chile, in places like Uruguay. I know that Iceland and Australia are still using a lot of the RNLI lifeboats. So we've always tried to help other organisations. However, sort of around 8 years ago, 2012, we started to sort of say, well, what can we do about all these reports we're getting about what we call the global silent epidemic. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, estimates back in 2014, they produced a report called the Silent Epidemic, which estimated 360,000 people drown globally. And that's of the numbers of accounts that had been recorded. However, they estimated that that figure could actually be well over 1 million people. And the reason they didn't know what that figure was is that a lot of people drown in areas where there's no records kept. So if you go to places like Bangladesh, where children, they estimate up to 18,000 children are drowning, those deaths never even make it onto any records. So they're just kept quiet within the community. So that's quite a shocking figure. So the RNLI thought, well, what can we do to make a difference to that figure? And again, also a lot of people, as you're well aware, in the migrant boats, there's lots of deaths happening on a daily basis. If you look at the news today, there was a boat that sank with, I think it was 19 deaths. And where do those deaths ever get recorded? So the number is quite horrific. And nobody's ever really talking about drowning. You know, nobody ever's mentioning it on a global arena. But yet everybody's talking about malaria. Everybody's talking about COVID now because it's in the news every day. But drowning is, as I say, nobody's really talking about it. And we felt that we had a duty to actually, what can we do? We've almost got 200 years of experience and we want to make a difference to that. And then 320,000 is the revised figure that the WHO came out with last year. And again, that's from the records that they have. So it's actually gone down in the last few years. So that's actually good to see. Why that's gone down, we don't know, but it's quite interesting to see that figure has come down in the last 5 years. In terms of where the drownings are happening, so from all the data that we have, we know that 90%, unfortunately, are happening in Africa and Asia. So 90% of all that total figure that I showed you before, we know is happening in Africa and Asia. And what's even sadder is that 50% of that figure is actually children. So out of that 320,000 deaths every year from drowning that we know of, 50% are happening in children. And why are people drowning? Well, it's sometimes the really simple things. It's lack of supervision. Children just playing out in, especially in Bangladesh, where there's water everywhere, and then falling into a pond. They're not being supervised, and if they can't swim, they end up drowning. You know, floods are on the increase as well. And again, when there's big floods happening across different countries in Asia, sometimes the deaths are never recorded anywhere. And again, people going about their daily lives on transport, children going to school on boats, as you can see in that bottom left picture, and also workers working in fisheries, seaweed farmers, and their livelihoods around water, going about their daily work, but they're not safe or they haven't been taught to swim. And again, the loss of life can be very high. And sometimes we just haven't got that data. So what the RNLI is really trying to do is understand what the drowning is. And just to put that into context, when we started working internationally, we started doing a lot of what the RNLI is known for. You know, we're known for search and rescue. We're known for our maritime search and rescue expertise. And we first went out to Bangladesh and started working with the Coast Guard, helping them set up their search and rescue. But what we soon realized that actually if children are drowning, we can set up 1,000 lifeboat stations all along the coast of Bangladesh, but that's not really going to stop the issue of children drowning. So we realized that the main reason they were drowning is because of lack of supervision. So we commissioned some research in an area of South Bangladesh called Barisal to better understand, what the numbers were, and then also what we could do to try and stop those numbers happening. And the figures that came back from the small sample of population that we sampled in terms of going out house-to-house surveys was quite shocking to see how many under fives were actually drowning. So the 1 to 5 year olds were particularly high on that list of people, children that were drowning. So we looked at, well, what are the interventions that could actually prevent that? And what we realized soon that actually if you could create community creches within that community and have the children supervised during the key hours that were being identified as the children drowning, is that by giving them that supervision, then hopefully that would prevent them drowning through lack of supervision. And as I say, that project now has really bedded into that part of Bangladesh. And we're now 5 years later, since we've started, we're now gathering the data to see if we can make any impact. And the initial figures coming back over the last 5 years is that we've really managed to reduce drowning. And I haven't got the official figures yet because they're still being, but they reckon we've managed to reduce drowning in those areas by 50%. So that's quite a huge impact. So what our approach is with our international work is there's a number of things. So first of all, as I said to you, we want to understand who are the risk groups, and that will then allow us to put in the right interventions. Because if we just go out thinking that we're going to set up lifeboat services all around the world, that's not quite the solution, especially if children are drowning through lack of supervision. So it's understanding who are the high risk groups to then put the intervention in place. Also, we need to raise awareness. And again, as I said to you at the start, a lot of people are aware of malaria, malnutrition, but not aware of drowning. So what we're doing is we've got a small advocacy team that's working at UN level to actually try and get awareness of the issue. And we were really, really pushing for the first UN resolution on drowning prevention. And up till February this year, we were really pushing that through. But unfortunately, COVID has hit, so we had to stop that. But we are still hoping to pick up that work as soon as we can. And that will then hopefully lead to the first UN resolution. And if that UN resolution comes into play, then that will make governments actually stand up and take notice that if they've got issue with drowning in their country, that they are accountable and need to start doing something about it. So hopefully that will really get governments starting to think about what they can do. Also, we need to work in countries that have that high burden. So from the statistics we have, we know there's a number of countries with a really high burden. So if you look at Bangladesh, you look at India, you look at countries like China, the burden of drowning there is really, really high. So we want to try and start operating and working in those countries to try and understand the figures better and how that, the risk factors to then work alongside the governments and key stakeholders to try and start making a change. So hopefully if we sort of have that really high level approach working at that global UN level, and then within the countries with the high burdens, hopefully we'll slowly gather that momentum to start bringing drowning onto the agenda and get organizations, countries and governments and global institutions to actually start putting resources into the big injustice that drowning is. It doesn't need to be that way, but we need to make awareness of the issue. And just a little bit on some of the work that we've done. For example, in Bangladesh, when we first went out to work there, we also worked in Cox's Bazar, which is a very, very popular tourist destination within Bangladesh. And when we first went out, we were hearing horrific stories of the amount of deaths that were occurring on this stretch of beach in Cox's Bazar. So we decided to go out and provide some training to some local lifeguards. And these are 3 lifeguards in Bangladesh. We've got Osman, Alangi and Otto, and we gave them skills to become trainers themselves. And they then went to go on and train all their lifeguards, and they now provide a very, very effective lifeguard service along the beaches in Cox's Bazar. And having been there myself a number of times, it is incredible the prevention work that they do. And I can't put a figure on how many lives they've probably saved over the last 7-8 years since they've been in service. And as I say, that's what we try to do. As the RNLI knows that we're not going to solve the problem the RNLI alone, so it's important that we work in partnerships with organisations like CRPRB, who run the lifeguard service, and just build capacity from within. And that's again another project that I've been very lucky to be involved in, was with the Bangladesh Fire Service. When we first started working in Bangladesh, the fire service didn't have any water rescue capability. They were very, very focused on fires, but yet the biggest threat in Bangladesh is actually flood. Or one of the biggest threats in Bangladesh is flooding. So we started a project with them, which was an initial pilot, which then led on to a 5-year project. And we've now trained 16 fire officers to be trainers in flood response. And they're now rolling that training throughout the whole of Bangladesh Fire Service. And what's been great as well is that they've actually implemented a 1-day water safety course into all their fire recruits training. So 1 day of their basic training is now done on water safety and water rescue. And they're also carrying out prevention work. I would never have thought that as a byproduct of that project is that the Bangladesh Fire Service would now be actively going out to ferry terminals and providing safety advice, and also especially during big festivals where there's a big movement of people throughout Bangladesh on the waterways. Their fire service, they're providing, as I say, a safety messaging, and they've resulted in a number of lives saved as well. They've been on scene to be able to deal with water rescue situations. And again, what we found is when we started working in a lot of the countries that we were working in, is that we tried to use manuals that we were bringing over from the UK, and we soon realized that actually these manuals were not really fit for purpose. So what we started to do is, as we started to deliver training in different subjects like aquatic survival, teaching swimming skills, flood safety, we started to develop manuals in partnership with the organizations we were working. And what we've done now with all these resources that we've developed, we've now made them open source. So they are available to download from our website. And what we want to do is any organization that wants to use them, they're free to be downloaded. And hopefully that way they've got access to training materials, which, as again, having worked in a lot of places, they just don't have any of the training materials. So they can download them. Also, what we found is when we were working in a lot of countries, they relied on us bringing expensive equipment over from the UK. If you put that into context, a throw bag here in the UK costs around £40 to buy. If you were to buy a rescue throw bag off the shelf, £40. And that's very unrealistic for example, the fire service to be able to buy 1,000 throw bags, because the cost would be prohibitive to them to buy that rescue equipment. So we actually worked with local tailors to actually come up with a low-cost throw bag made in the community, and now they're able to make them in country for around $3. So again, we've produced a number of manuals that are for low-cost rescue equipment. And a couple of years ago, we worked with an organization called MOAS, who are providing a response in the Rohingya camps in Cox's Bazar, and they've adopted all our manuals. We trained 5 trainers from within the Rohingya community, and then we also allowed them to use our life-saving low-cost equipment manuals, and they're now making throw bags and rescue equipment within the communities, and they've got teams of volunteers that are able to be there to provide a response, especially during the monsoon season. And also we had our first case where we know of a responder that was able to save an 11-year-old boy who had ended up falling into the water chasing a football, and because of the public rescue equipment that was to hand, they were able to rescue him from drowning. So it's great when you hear these stories, because sometimes we never hear of the successes. So when you get that news, it makes all your work worthwhile. And then going back to my point is that the RNLI knows that we are not going to make a difference unless we work with other organizations. So these are some of the organizations that we work with. So whether they're research organizations, philanthropic organizations, but one of the really key partnerships that we've got is with the World Health Organization. So we've now become an official partner with the World Health Organization, and we're looking at how we can work closer to actually really start getting drowning onto the agenda, and looking at where we can start working closer to make a difference. And as Robin said at the start as well, one of the big areas that I've been involved in is working on a project with the International Maritime Rescue Federation. And the International Maritime Rescue Federation is a membership-based organisation. They have members from all over the world. And again, one of the things that we found is that they didn't really have any recognised training materials. And there was lots of organisations that were going out to other countries to help build capacity, but they weren't really using any standardised training. And to put that into context, for example, in Morocco, we had the RNLI was going out to help with some training, and then we had the Norwegians going out to deliver some training, but we were not using the same training materials. So part of this project was to actually standardise that approach. So it didn't matter whether Norway was going out, whether Dutch, whether Germans, whoever was going out to deliver that training, this is now the approved training manual. And what that is allowing us to do as well is now we're starting to build capacity within that African region, and they're using that manual. So we're now training trainers within the countries that we're working is to make it sustainable. And they had their first trainers that were trained back in October, ran their first course within Africa back in March. So it's Africans now training Africans using the resources that we've developed, and it's really, really rewarding to see how these manuals now are so welcome, to the point where they want to translate it into various different languages, and it's making a huge difference. And that's very satisfying to see that that work now is actually starting to produce some really meaningful impact. So going back to what the RNLI's international work is all about, is what we want to do is we're working towards a world where nobody drowns. So hopefully that's kind of a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the RNLI's background and international work. So thank you for listening, and I'm sure there might be a few questions coming in, so I'll hand over back to Robin.
Thank you, Dave. That was really super interesting and a real eye-opener. I mean, I think from Atlantic Pacific's organization, you know, we started in Japan. We were very surprised by the lack of resources in Japan to deal with search and rescue at sea, only to discover that, you know, that this is a huge problem. And on the Atlantic Pacific journey, you know, we've been discovering along the way the scale of drowning, and that we take for granted in the UK, this luxury almost of having the RNLI protecting our coastline. And so it's a really fascinating piece of work that's going on. And, you know, we used the manual that you prepared at the RNLI, which is now the IMRF manual. We use that as our kind of Bible when we go abroad. And certainly when we're in Japan, trying to explain the sort of extent of what we want to do, by using that manual, we know that we're kind of using a common strategy. And it's really exciting to see that that might be a common strategy that can be used globally. And as an organization, that's really our endeavor. So, I mean, it's really fantastic to see the work that you're doing with the RNLI. I think we're going to go over to some questions now. Sarah, are you okay to kind of coordinate that, or Finn?
Yep, absolutely. So we have a few questions from the chat. I will just go in order, starting with Kate, and I will read Kate's question out. To Dave, are there no legal responsibilities on governments to address drowning in their countries? Or do international bodies have any enforcement over governments where drowning is high? What are the biggest challenges in working internationally? So multi-part question for you there.
That's a very good question, and it depends where you go in the world. Governments deny that it's even an issue in their countries. So it's trying to work at that level and actually make them aware that it is actually an issue. So you have to be very careful how you go about that. However, if you manage to get it as a UN resolution, then governments then can be a bit more accountable, because under the UN they can sort of say, well, look, there is an issue there. So it is a bit of a political minefield, so you have to tread very, very carefully. And in a lot of countries, it's a competing issue with a number of other issues. So how do you get it at the forefront is part of the challenge, and that's where advocacy really understands. And it's also working with the right local partners, because we're not experts within that country, but for us, the RNLI, we need to find those key partners that can actually work at that level and have the trust to obviously work with the government. So in Bangladesh, working with the fire service, that gives us a lot of credibility, because the fire service have a huge influence within the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Disaster. So the key thing is having the right partners. And also what we're doing as well is, I don't know if anybody's aware of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. Within those Sustainable Development Goals, there is a number of issues of, for example, like eradicating child poverty. So if you can bring it in from that angle, it's like, well, if in Bangladesh 18,000 children are drowning every year, how are you ever going to eradicate child poverty if you don't address the issue of drowning? So it's looking at how you might frame it within that context. And it's also working with key organizations, for example, getting UNICEF, who are the biggest children's global organization working in child protection, but yet they're not really focusing on drowning. Is like, you need to make UNICEF aware that actually drowning is a huge killer of children. So we are working very closely with the organizations like UNICEF to actually bring it in onto their agenda. And a lot of the time it's because, as I said to you before, they're just not aware of it being an issue. And they're focusing on so many other things. So it is just making them aware, and also having that data, and that's what we're doing. Is in the countries that we know that there's a lot of drowning, is actually going out and getting the research and the data so that we've got the clear evidence to then present back. Because if you just go and say, oh, do you know that there's 18,000 children drowning in Bangladesh? They'll be like, well, how do you know that? Where's the data? So you need to have the data that's going to give you that information to then put your case forward. And that's where, as I say, the advocacy is really important, and the research. Hopefully that's answered the question in the roundabout way.
Well, it's such an interesting thing, because we have we have that problem amazingly in Japan, which is a developed country. One of the most difficult things that we came up against was finding statistics in Japan about drowning. And that opened up a whole kind of process for us to try and find that information. And obviously the World Health Organization has the kind of most up-to-date stuff, but we could see how many holes were in that kind of research. And so it's a really interesting problem.
I don't want to put Tom on the spot here, but Tom asked a pretty good follow-up question to Kate's question. Tom, do you want to unmute yourself and ask it? If you feel like it was answered, just say that and we'll move on, but I feel like it was partially addressed.
Thanks. Yeah, my question was basically, can you tie drowning prevention to other government or international policies similar to the Sustainable Development Goals? It's something you can do with other development projects. If you can pin your project to something that exists in country, you have a sort of ready-made commitment from the government there. Is that something you guys have done with RNLI International?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tom. So what we're doing is we're looking at where drowning fits into the SDGs. So if you're aware of the SDGs, I think there's 32 different global sustainable development goals. Some are around climate change, some of them are through eradication of child poverty. So what we're looking at is, where does drowning actually sit within that development goal? So yeah, we have done quite a lot of work to sort of map across, and that gives us a really good way in to then look at organizations that are working, for example, in disaster risk reduction. So if there's a global sustainable development goal on reducing disaster risk reduction, but we know that from floods, lots of people are losing their life through floods, is if you want to improve disaster risk reduction, then you need to look at drowning and flooding as a way in. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work in trying to map that across, and then looking at which are the organisations that are working within those areas to then try and work alongside them. So yeah, no, that's a really good point. And for example, we know that Save the Children are working all over the world, but yet they don't really necessarily work in drowning prevention. But yet, if globally 50% of all the deaths are actually children, let's start working with organisations like UNICEF and Save the Children to actually incorporate drowning prevention into some of the areas of their work. And that way you get that sort of buy-in and that mass, critical mass to start making a difference.
Great, thank you, David. There's a few more questions, but Tom? No, okay. Yeah, there's a few more questions, but just to say that to the group that David has very generously offered for the PowerPoint to be shared. If anyone would like to have that, you can email us at media@atlanticpacific.org.uk and we will pass it along to you. So just shoot your email to me privately or to the group, whatever you're comfortable with. Or you can email that directly, of course. So a couple more questions. We have Lily, who has a two-part question, both excellent points. If you want to unmute yourself. I can't see you.
I can do it time if you want, so I'm not hogging all of the Zoom time.
Okay.
Hi, Dave. Really nice to see you. But it's really nice to get some of your time and hear about your work, as usual. This is a slightly self-interested question. When it comes to training the trainers in the different projects that you have, given the logistical difficulties of kind of going and auditing or checking in regularly, how do you ensure that the standard of training is maintained?
Sure, that's a really, really good question. So to put that into context, in the two projects specifically that I've been involved in heavily was with the Bangladesh Fire Service. Over a period of 5 years, the way we started was we initially trained a number of people, and then from that pool of people that we started to train, we started identifying people that could then be going on to be trainers. So we gave them a couple of years of getting experience, and then we then started to run train the trainer courses. So the RNLI's actually specifically developed a train the trainer package. So that allowed us to then go back and in consultation with the fire service, we identified the trainers that we thought should be put forward. And then we ran the trainer course, which is very specifically around just delivering training skills. So how to be a trainer, not necessarily how to deliver search and rescue or the flood, but how to deliver training as a whole. And then from there, we then delivered a training on how to deliver the specifics of the flood rescue. So that then allowed them to get trainer skills and then being able to teach the subject matter experts that they bring. And then what we did in partnership, we then started to do joint delivery, where the fire service trainers that we trained would start training aspects of that course. And then slowly we would withdraw to the point where they would be running their own courses. And what we then did is we verified them a number of times. They notified us every time that they were running a course, and then we could send a couple of our trainers and go and verify them. So we had a verification process. We would record them and then make sure they had the right feedback. And then when we were 100% happy that they were completely able to deliver without us being there, it's hand over to them. You know, they're a fire service. They already have a governance in place. So under the fire service governance, we've kind of handed it over to them, and now we've withdrawn from that project. We're still available to help them out whenever they want. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult. What we can't do is we now can't keep on going back to Bangladesh and verifying the fire service. You know, it's very much down to them now to maintain that system in place. So in an ideal world, what we would want is to develop trainers that are then going to be training the trainers, if that makes sense. So a master trainer that can then, so within the Bangladesh Fire Service, we developed 3 master trainers, and they actually came over to the UK and spent 2 weeks here in the UK, where we took them to visit a number of fire stations here in the UK to look at how the fire service did their training, and then they also did some training up in Scotland to be exposed to different challenging conditions. And we verified them, and now we're happy with them being able to train other trainers. So yeah, it's a long process, but if you want to maintain that quality assurance, you need to make sure that you follow a good governance structure. Hopefully that's answered the question enough. If the answer.
Thank you, David. I'm going to ask a question from Adrian that he's asked me to read out. Given that the People's Republic of China is more involved in investment in Africa and other regions, is there any liaison with China in terms of life-saving organizations?
That's a very good question, actually, and I can't really give you an answer because I don't really work with China. But I am aware of China doing a lot of work in Africa, and having worked in Tanzania and Morocco, I see that there's a lot of funding going into infrastructure within countries and helping countries build their infrastructure. So I think there's an opportunity there, but it's how you go about working within, how do you influence the Chinese government to actually potentially do some work towards drowning prevention. And I think that's where having those key partnerships with global institutions like the UN, and in Asia you have ASEAN, which is like the equivalent of the EU but for Asia. So if you can start getting in with those regional bodies to actually start influencing the governments that form part of those bodies, then I think that's how you go about it. But from my experience, it is such a slow process. It's not a magic switch that you just say, right, we're going to go and work. It takes years and years of slowly, and to get in there as well and find, as I said before, finding those key partners that are key to be able to make political decisions and influence politics in those countries. And you can work so hard to get to a certain point, and there might be an election and a change of government, and all that work you spent for the last 4 years working in that to get that government to actually do something about it, there might be a complete change of government and you must have to go back to square one. So it's a very, very challenging, and it's not, as I say, something that's going to just change overnight. So yeah, it'd be great if China did, what's the word I'm looking for, is use its influence globally to make a change to drowning, especially as you say, they're working in a lot of African countries now. So yeah, watch this space.
Thank you, David. So just before we're just mindful of time. So before we take the last two questions, we'll just pop over to Kate, who will introduce our next talk coming up later this week. And I'll share the link for that as well in the chat. And then we'll have two more questions before we go, just to stay roughly within the hour. All right, over to you, Kate.
Hey everyone, so as part of Refugee Week, which is this week, we have a good friend and colleague of ours called Hannah Entwistle-Chapuisier, I'm not sure if I've said it correctly, who is going to be talking about a protection agenda that was created for people who are displaced across borders through climate and disaster. And so we've been working with her for the last 5 years on the protection agenda, and also to consider places where people are going to be displaced by disaster, especially flooding and kind of coastal erosion. And she basically has a project that lobbies the UN and governments to take on preferable policies and ideas about how they can either move people out of the way or put in mitigating things that can help reduce people who are either killed or their livelihoods are lost by disaster and climate change. So it's on Thursday the 18th at 3 o'clock. I think it'll be really interesting to hear from a lawyer who works with the UN based in Geneva around how we can really lobby governments to take on some of our ideas around people who are affected by climate. And as Dave said, something that's really valuable in terms of getting really big change towards reducing global drowning.
Thank you, Kate. All right, so our second last question from Dickon Mitchell, sorry, can't read today.
No worries. Thanks, David. There's been a fair bit of national media pushback for international projects to RNLI International. What actually is RNLI's international project support selection policy? I imagine there's probably quite a complex set of policies that allow the selection process to go on.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And so we've been reviewing our international strategy over the last couple of years in terms of how we're going to work. And we realized, as I said to you in the presentation, is that the RNLI is not just going to solve this issue alone. And it's key that we work in partnerships. So we also set ourselves a target that by 2024, we want to be working in countries that account for 25% of the global burden of drowning. So that's allowed us to sort of narrow down our focus. So we know that, for example, India accounts for, I think it's something like 16% of global drowning. Bangladesh accounts for about 4%, and then Tanzania, Cambodia. So if we work in those 4 countries in terms of having projects within those countries with key partners, that will give us that 25%. And then what we also have is we've got a global strategy, which is very much around the advocacy work and how we can share the awareness of the issue. And that's where I go back to that UN resolution, that if the RNLI can really be the instigators of that UN resolution. And the RNLI is not about getting the RNLI brand on that work. It's done very, very quietly in sort of the background to actually get the UN to work this through and create that global drowning prevention resolution. So going back to your question, we've now identified the 4 countries that we want to work in over the next few years. And as we start to move forward, we might bring other countries on board. And then, as I say, a global level is looking for that big organizations that can really, really influence that, raising awareness and then go on to influence governments to then go on and do something about it. So hopefully that's kind of answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. I think there's probably a bigger question there, but not necessarily for take up too much of the time. But it would be good to chat separately at some point as well.
Yeah, feel free to get my email if you want to get my email address, or I'm happy to share those. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions as best I can, really. And if I don't have the answers, I can always try and find out who might have the answer, because I don't know it all. I work in a very small part of the RNLI, but yeah, I've been there a long time, so I understand a lot of the background to a lot of things, and I've seen change and decision being made according to how things evolve. So we're learning as well as internationally. As I said, if you look at the history, we've only been going as part of a formal part of what the RNLI does for 8 years, and that's we're learning a lot. We're not a classic international development organization. We're known for our maritime search and rescue. So to go and work in countries, we're not necessarily the right people to do it. But as I said, if we find the right partners that can do that for us, then it's creating those partnerships to have the maximum impact.
Thanks, man. Fantastic.
Thank you, David and Dickon. And for the last question, from Joel, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi. My question links a little bit to what you have just said, actually. I kind of was interested to know a little bit more about funding. The model that you have in the UK is obviously that you're funded by volunteers or funded by charity and run by volunteers predominantly. Is that a model that you would seek to replicate in other countries, perhaps to have the countries that you're working with having their own version of the RNLI, which is funded within that country by charity and run by volunteers from that country? Is that kind of the long-term goal? So
that's a very interesting question, because we want to work with organizations that ultimately can fund themselves in an ideal world, you know, because from my experience, we started working in Tanzania with a fairly new search and rescue organization that wanted to set themselves up on the model of volunteers, similar to how the RNLI runs. And that is very, very challenging, because what I found, we were really going out to just deliver search and rescue training, actually ended up into a project where we were trying to help them set up an organization from scratch. And that is very, very challenging in a country, especially like Tanzania, with all the politics and not necessarily from a culture of volunteering. So we learned that maybe that's not the best approach to try and start setting up small organizations that are going to rely on volunteers. Unless they're well established, we don't see as our role is trying to do that. We can definitely help with the technical training, but I think it's a huge undertake for us to be trying to set up organizations from scratch. So if I give you the other extreme, by working with the fire service in Bangladesh, well, really well established, they've got the infrastructure. In terms of value for money and my time of going out and working, it's a huge difference. So Tanzania was, I shouldn't be saying that, but it was so challenging to get them. And then the political climate changed with the new government in place, and they put in lots of restrictions on fundraising. And so the organization is really, really struggled to sustain itself. So whereas in Bangladesh, the fire service are always going to get government funding. So that's why one of the key lessons that I think we've taken from the last 8 years is try and work with a well-established organization that has already got the infrastructure in place, in terms of whether they're an NGO, whether they're a government organization or civil society, is making sure that we do our due diligence on our partners to make sure that we're going to get a good return on investment, really, because it's not sustainable going out trying to set up small organizations all around the world. I think that's been a big lesson for me and a number of our colleagues. And that's something that we've learned by going out and doing small pilots and testing our work. So yeah, I think, as I say, one of the key things is to work with well-established organizations that can actually really make a huge difference, and hence why we're working now with organizations like UNICEF and WHO, where we don't have to really spend time trying to build the capacity of that organization or the infrastructure. So yeah, key partnerships is going to be absolutely critical in getting that massive impact. So hopefully that's answered the question, Joel.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Great. I think we've now kind of run out of time. I'm sure we could continue talking about this forever, and there's a lot of people that I can see here who have got a big interest and a keen interest in this situation and the issue of global drowning. So I'm sure we could talk forever. And it's really good that we're talking about these kind of things, because as you clearly pointed out in your presentation, Dave, it is a really serious problem. And the more that people are talking about it, and the more the discussion is available around this situation, the better. So, I mean, we're super grateful to have you giving us this presentation, and we're really grateful to everyone coming along this afternoon to listen to the really interesting and really kind of detailed presentation that you've given us this afternoon, Dave. So if we could all just, everybody, a thumbs up to Dave. Thank you so much for that. That was absolutely brilliant. It was really, really
No, thank you. As I said at the start, it's always a privilege to be able to share the work that we do, and as you say, the more people that are aware of this issue, and I know that different people work in different areas, it's just getting that momentum, and as I say, do whatever we can to try and start bringing those numbers down, really. So no, I really appreciate the invite to allow me to come and talk to everybody, because it's something that obviously are very, very close to my heart. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Please go and check us out on our website, which is linked in the conversation there. Also, we're a charity. All of our work is done through donation. Everybody that works for us is a volunteer, a bit like the RNLI, but we're 100% volunteers. We have a shop selling all of our fancy branded AP merchandise that you'll see some people wearing in some of the screens. You know, it's all available. It's all sitting right next to me in boxes, and it's ready to be sent out. So don't be shy. Please come and join us. Follow us on Facebook for updates about, we've got a few of these events on APTV planned for the future. So follow up for more things. And once again, thank you very much, Dave. And we hope to see you all again in the future.
Thank you so much, Dave. If you wish to unmute yourself and say bye, feel free. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, and we'll catch up soon in the near future.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.